Hello everyone, this is Randy here. It is Monday, August the 26th, 2024. A recent news, breaking news, which I find to be really fascinating and also perhaps alarming, is that the CEO and founder of Telegram, Pavel Durov, who is a Russian citizen and also recently he became a citizen of France. He has been arrested in France, near Paris. So currently, as I'm filming this video, presumably Pavel Durov is in some detention center somewhere in France being questioned by the French authorities. So he has been arrested, and there's some speculation as to the reason. We don't know the full story yet, but the speculation is that he has been arrested by the French authorities and is facing charges due to his refusal to cooperate with the French authorities, or perhaps the European authorities, not too sure whom, but presumably his refusal to cooperate with the French authorities to moderate content and communication on Telegram, his social media app. So there's been some controversy with respect to the Telegram app. It's an app, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's similar to WhatsApp, in that it's a messaging app, and you can also create groups, so messaging groups within this app. It's fairly simple. It's mostly used for communication and sending text messaging, images, and videos. But there's been some controversy over this app because there's been accusations the app is being used to facilitate crime. So that users of the app are using it to engage or plan terrorist activities. Users are using it to buy or sell illicit substances like drugs, to perpetuate child pornography or sex trafficking, and a list of other crimes. So that's the allegation against Telegram, the app itself. And Pavel Durov, the CEO, has, being the founder, and I assume the controlling person, or one of the key controlling people of the app, he's being questioned. So that's all we know. So that's the backdrop of this breaking news story. So today I'm going to do something called a point counterpoint. So I'm going to argue, first of all, that his arrest is unfair, that this is a bad idea, and that this spells very has very ominous implications for freedom of speech, freedom of communication, and the freedom of expression on the internet. So that's going to be sort of the first set of arguments, and then after we're going to do a counterpoint, which means that afterwards I'm going to argue the opposite side. So I'm going to have essentially a debate with myself on this topic. So I'm going to argue subsequently that his arrest is a good thing, that social media platforms should be accountable for the content on these platforms, and that failure to do so should make them subject to state intervention through state mechanisms such as the criminal code and penal penalties that are perpetuated or enacted by the state to protect the public. So that's going to be the second set of arguments in this counterpoint. Okay, so let's start with the first position. So the first position is that his arrest is alarming, and that this is actually a really bad sign for anyone who's an advocate of freedom of speech, and that this is in fact state overreach into jurisdiction that they really shouldn't have. So let's take a look at what's happened. You have a CEO of a private company who himself is not engaging in any crime, right? I think it would be very silly for anyone to argue that Pavel Durov himself is engaging in criminal activity in the sense that he's not selling child pornography or sex trafficking, he's not selling drugs or buying drugs, he's not engaging in terrorism. The only thing that he is doing is he's the CEO and the founder of an application that allows its users to message each other. And what those users do with that power is certainly outside of his control and to an extent not his responsibility. Let's use telephones, for example, right? Should we arrest the CEOs and owners of telephone companies? Because in theory, terrorists and sex traffickers and drug dealers and criminals can use telephones and cell phones to communicate their plans or to set up drug deals or prostitution deals or weapons deals or terrorist deals or whatever criminal activity that they're engaging in. They can use cell phones and telephones to do so. So should we arrest the owners of telephone companies, right? So by way of that example, it almost seems absurd that the owner or the CEO of the platform itself should somehow be accountable for the actions of users, because the CEO is at least several steps removed from the actual crime itself, because it's again not the CEO, him or herself, who's engaging in this criminal activity. I would then also argue that if you're going to take the stance that someone like Pavel Durov is responsible for the dealings and the communications on Telegram, then you should probably also arrest Elon Musk for what happens on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, it's now X. And you should probably also arrest Mark Zuckerberg for what happens on Facebook and Instagram, right? You should probably be arresting all of these people who are the owners or controllers of social media apps. And that would be a floodgate into a very alarming world where you have company bosses being arrested simply because of the use of their programs and their software. And that's a direction as a society we certainly don't want to go towards, because again, these people don't directly have anything to do with the day-to-day use of their inventions. And whether you like Elon Musk or you like Mark Zuckerberg is irrelevant. For them to face criminal sanctions, for them to be arrested and to face jail time for the communications that they're not responsible for, that take place between private individuals on their apps, it's certainly not consistent with values of a free and democratic society. Now, furthermore, I would argue that this is a very alarming situation with respect to freedom of speech, with respect to the implications for freedom of speech, where the French authorities in this particular situation have gone forward with the arrest because Pavel Durov has refused to cooperate in moderating individual conversations, or perhaps he's refused to give up user information from a privacy standpoint. Again, we don't really know what he's refused to do, but certainly there's some indications he's refused to cooperate. And what does that mean for privacy, for freedom of speech, for freedom of expression? Well, that means that the state, if this arrest were to lead to criminal charges, the state would then have much greater say over what can and cannot be said between private individuals. So absolutely there is, humans engage in crime. Like, humans have always engaged in crime, but that doesn't mean you need to censor every mode of communication in order to preemptively prevent that crime, right? That leads down the path of totalitarianism, right? Where the presumption that humans will use communication means to engage in crime gives the state the excuse to enact draconian laws to censor speech before it even occurs. Even if there were some individuals using Telegram for improper means, Telegram has millions of users, if not perhaps 1 billion users by some accounts. And the majority of these people are certainly not using Telegram as a means to engage in criminal activity. The majority of these users are simply using Telegram as a legitimate messaging app and using it simply to communicate with their friends or their colleagues or their family, and to have this heavy-handed approach forcing the platform itself to give up private information of individuals or to censor or remove certain content on the whole is damaging to the entire user base and damaging to all users of social media and all those people who are communicating on the internet, because now this communication could be subject to state oversight, which is enforced through the threat or of the arrest of the people responsible for maintaining the app, and that's a very scary future that we could be walking towards, where governments can tell you what you can and cannot say on apps by virtue of forcing the apps to censor you. So, for example, if let's say one government, right? This is common in apps in China, for example, where there is actually government censorship on issues like Taiwan, right? Where it's actually happening, right? So if the government doesn't like political conversations about Taiwanese independence or anything that is not in line with the official message of the Communist Party, they will actually take steps in these apps to censor that information, right? So the state forces the apps, or perhaps intervenes or through some mechanism, either forcing the people running the apps, or they go in themselves to remove messages of individuals who they deem are spreading communications contrary to the official ideological stance of the state, right? And you see this in China with their heavy censorship of information, and I'm sure you see this probably to a larger extent in countries like North Korea and other states that have that type of totalitarian trend and totalitarian way of controlling its citizens. So for this type of state intervention to take place, where those of us living in Western nations could now be subject to censorship from the state, removal of messages, the giving up and the handing over of private information on some allegation only without due process is very concerning. So the net result is you have apps that they're essentially in part state-run, right? Where private conversations and private interactions is now greatly monitored and controlled by the state, because the state has the ability to forcibly arrest and lay criminal charges against the founders and the managers of the app itself. So a very scary world that could look like from the perspective of privacy, from the perspective of freedom of speech, from the perspective of just being able to communicate. I would further add that there are those who suspect that the arrest of Pavel Durov is perhaps politically motivated, that because he is a Russian citizen, that this may have something to do with the war in Ukraine, and that this was a politically motivated arrest. At least the Russian media, if you look at like RT News, they're advancing that particular argument. I'm not too sure if it is. The French authorities are saying that it's not. Macron, French president, is saying that it's not a politically motivated arrest, but rather it has everything to do with Pavel Durov's refusal to cooperate with the authorities. So to summarize the arguments here, we would say that it's unfair and unjust to hold owners of social media platforms or technology companies responsible for the communications of the individuals who are communicating on these platforms, as the owners themselves obviously are not engaging in crime and they're not directly responsible for these communications. So to arrest these individuals is highly alarming, concerning, unjust, and unreasonable. And then also the trajectory and the implications of such an arrest is that the state would therefore have more control over the private communications of individuals and the private information of these individuals if the state were to ask companies to hand over this data, which would be very concerning, and we would go down the path of these totalitarian countries where that's exactly what's happening right now. Increased amounts of rigid state censorship where individuals have their information handed over, where individuals cannot communicate freely on the internet and using social media tools. Okay, so that's the argument against the arrest. I will now do the counterpoint, which is the argument in favor of the arrest. And then, of course, I'm now presenting the opposite side of the argument. To do so, I'm going to pop my collar, because you always need to pop your collar if you're presenting the opposite argument, so I don't sound exactly like the same person. So this is the argument in favor of Pavel Durov's arrest and why this is actually good for society. So as you guys know, Pavel Durov was recently arrested, and this is actually a really good thing for society, because for many years now, there has been no accountability from social media organizations like Twitter, X, Facebook, Meta, Telegram. These social media organizations and their bosses have been able to operate with impunity. They've been able to create platforms where racism and where hate, where child trafficking, child pornography, the sale of weapons and illicit substances. They've created platforms where this has been facilitated. These platforms are toxic. These platforms actually decrease the standard of living for most people. And no one is held accountable because they use the excuse, well, hey, it's the people themselves who are doing it. So we know, for example, that the founder of the darknet crypto-based Silk Road, right? He was arrested. This was probably a decade ago. The founder of Silk Road, which was predominantly used to sell drugs and illicit materials on the dark web. And he was arrested. And the reason he was arrested was because his platform was facilitating illegal activities. And this was an individual who refused to rein in these illegal activities. And had it not been for this platform, Silk Road, these illegal activities would not have occurred or would not have occurred so easily. So the people who are responsible for the facilitation of illegal activities should be equally responsible because they're facilitating and empowering and acting as the conduit through which these activities are taking place. We know, for example, another famous arrest, the founder of Backpages, who was arrested as a result of his creation, and Backpages was used. This was a website called Backpages, was used predominantly for prostitution, for escorts, for the sale of sex, and along with that, child sex trafficking and sex trafficking in general. So illicit and illegal activities with respect to the sale of sex. And Backpages was well known for that. And the owners of and the founders of pages like Backpages and Silk Road, they profited from the crimes. So even though they may not have been individually perpetuating the crimes, they facilitated these crimes. They are profiting from the crimes, and therefore they should equally be responsible. To take that example and apply it to the social media platforms, I think is apt, and I think is proper, as these individuals think that they're mightier than God, right? You have these people creating platforms that they force all of us to use them. It's almost impossible to operate in society now on a day-to-day basis without the use or the forced use of these platforms, because they're so ubiquitous and they're everywhere, and everybody, including your family members and your aunts, everybody uses them. And to be so ubiquitous with that power, as they would say, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Uncle Ben said that in Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. And certainly these CEOs, these owners, and these managers of these apps are not taking that very seriously. They're not applying this great responsibility they have over the apps. In fact, they're allowing these apps to become cesspools of misinformation, of toxic information, of false information, and to a large extent of crime and criminal activities. So who should be responsible, right? If you're allowing and facilitating this, who should be responsible? Well, it's my sincere belief that you, the CEO of this organization, of this app, you should be responsible. You are the one profiting the most from the proceeds of these criminal activities and these illicit messages. So it is proper for the state then to arrest you to cut off the head of the snake, if you will, and to put you where you belong, because you're essentially, poisonous to society by virtue of these creations that you've unleashed upon the world, which are certainly not healthy for the majority of the general public. Furthermore, it's important to remind you, the CEOs and owners of these apps, who is actually in charge, right? And that's the people. The people are in charge, and you have for so long bypassed the people by virtue of the strength of the technology. So I'm going to explain that a bit further. The state is elected, at least in a democratic country, by the people, right? And the arms, the various arms and organs of the state, including the criminal arms, there are, in theory, they are accountable to the people because the people elect the government. So in a Western democratic country, or in a democratic country in general, the organs of the state are in some ways directly or indirectly accountable to the people, and the people who therefore elect the government to enhance, perpetuate, and advance their will. But what's happened with these tech companies is that they've bypassed the democratic process entirely, right? These people are not elected by the people. Elon Musk is not elected by anybody. Mark Zuckerberg, not elected. Pavel Durov, certainly not elected. Yet their platforms have such large sway over such large groups of people, right? They control how we think, what we do, how we communicate. And it's also now becoming increasingly impossible to communicate without the use of some of these apps. But these apps are not neutral. These apps are designed in such a way, and the algorithms embedded in these apps are designed in such a way to create profit for the organization. They're not neutral communication tools. They're not just blanket communication tools without ideology or without embedded incentives. And the embedded incentives are that creates profit, right? So these tools are used or they're designed in such a way to generate as much profit as possible. And if that means creating algorithms that spread fake news, if that means creating spaces for crime, if that means doing anything but that generates more profit, then that's okay, right? These apps are totally fine with that, as long as they generate profit. It doesn't matter if they manipulate you, give you fake news, expose you to child pornography or the sale of drugs, or if they perpetuate terrorist messaging or messaging not appropriate for children. It doesn't matter. As long as profit is being made, the algorithm will keep giving you information or will keep putting you in front of information that allows the organizations to profit. And by doing so, they're not accountable to anyone, right? These ubiquitous apps are forming, controlling, and setting up parameters around how we communicate on a day-to-day basis. And because it's so difficult and almost impossible to communicate now without these apps, right? Without these tools, that these CEOs and these companies have gained immense amounts of power as a result, and power that is perhaps undeserved, and power that also curtails and circumvents the democratic process, because the people who are running these apps, again, are not elected. They're not accountable to the people. The only mechanism that the people have left is to rely on the state, to rely on the democratic leaders of the state and the democratic process. And if the state has determined by will of the people that these individuals need to be held accountable for their actions, And even if that means through the route of criminal prosecution, then that reflects the will of the people, that reflects the interest of the public in a democratic society. So my vote is to put all of them away. Put Elon behind bars, put Mark Zuckerberg behind bars, Pavel Durov, all of these people, right? These tech bros, let's put them behind bars where they belong, right? So they can't further harm children and members of our society. That's the counterpoint. That would be the counter argument as to why people like Pavel Durov got it coming to them, that they deserve being arrested, and that's why they should really rot in jail, and it's actually better for the rest of society. I hope you've enjoyed this point and counterpoint debate on this particular issue. Again, this is a fairly breaking news item in the sense that we don't know all the information yet as to why Pavel has been arrested or what specifically he's done. That information will surely be disclosed in the upcoming days, if not weeks, and there will be a more fulsome analysis as to why he's been arrested. There's been some talk that he could face up to 20 years of jail time. Very interesting implications. Doesn't matter what side of the debate you favor. I've presented both sides. It's still a very interesting topic. I hope you give some thought to this issue. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. I hope you're having a wonderful day. And until next time, this is Randy I. Goodbye.